But to get reaction to today's announcement and this deal, we've reached NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh. He's in Penticton, British Columbia. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Singh. I'd like to get your reaction to the government's announcement that it's reached this agreement to deal with First Nations to settle the class action lawsuit over unsafe drinking water.
Well, this is a positive step, as was stated. This is a small victory for the Indigenous communities who suffered under boil water advisories, who suffered without clean drinking water for so long. But this doesn't free the federal government from the responsibility to ensure that there is clean drinking water for all people. This is a settlement of the harm that Indigenous communities have suffered, but we still need to see a commitment to ensure that every community gets clean drinking water. And what we've seen so far are a lot of broken promises. The Liberals and Justin Trudeau promised in 2015 that the clean drinking water would be achieved by 2011, 6 years. They broke that promise and now are saying 5 more years. I think 11 years in one of the world's largest economies in the 21st century is far too long and inexcusable.
So if you were Prime Minister, what would you commit to deal with this challenge?
What I've seen from from the year and a half in this pandemic, when governments want to do something, they make it happen. In the immediate beginning of the pandemic, Justin Trudeau released over $750 billion to backstop banks right away. That's a colossal sum to backstop banks. That was a priority for Justin Trudeau. I would make clean drinking water a priority. I really believe it's not a question of the right plans or the funding. It's a question of political will. And so far, at the federal level, there has not been the political will to ensure that every Indigenous community has the dignity and respect of clean drinking water.
They have been working toward that goal, although they did admit that they weren't going to miss the 2021 deadline. But what specifically would you do? What timeline would you put in place? What plan would you enact to try and alleviate this problem?
Well, what I've seen, again, is it's really the lack of political will. We've seen this government, the Liberal government, act immediately when something is a priority.
What would you do?
They work so quickly. Make it a priority, right? It's clear that this has not been a priority. To make this a priority, I don't believe that the delays that we've seen, 11 years of the Liberal government, that they're saying it's going to take 11 years to bring clean drinking water, that's inexcusable. I would work with Indigenous communities, partner with them, and ensure that we are moving ahead as quickly as possible with every resource possible to deal with this.
You sent a letter to the new Governor General this week that said if Prime Minister Justin Trudeau asks her to dissolve Parliament to trigger an election, you want her to not do that. You want her to reject that. Did she respond to your letter?
No. So far, we've not received a response. But I want to really point out why I wrote this letter. The reason is we want to be very clear that the Liberal government has no reason. There is no loss of confidence. There is no reason to call this election other than Justin Trudeau seeking power. That is the only reason. And in a pandemic, I would hope that Justin Trudeau would rather work for people than pursue power. But it seems like his goal is to pursue a majority, which is the wrong thing to do when we've got so many things that still need to be finished. There's so many bills that are still outstanding that could be finished, that could be completed. There's so much work that we want to get done. And if the Liberals are serious about getting that work done, we're ready. We're more than willing to pass legislation, to help and speed up legislation, to get people the help they need.
The thing about the letter is that if Mary Simon were to do what you are asking her, it would break long-standing convention. And although technically she could do that, it would break with long-standing convention. Did you consult any constitutional experts before sending that letter?
We absolutely reached out to some experts, and we know very clearly that the election law state elections should happen within every 4 years. And there are exceptions to that is when a government loses confidence of the House. They haven't. They literally have not lost confidence in the House. There's no justification for this election other than Justin Trudeau's pursuit of power. And I get that people are cynical.
Are you comfortable with breaking longstanding tradition and asking her to do this? You know, she is the representative of the Queen. Canada is an independent country. It's a sovereign nation. You want to see that happen?
It's a check and balance, and the check and balance is there to say there should be a reason for calling an election. And the reason is if the Parliament, if the government loses confidence of the House. That's a good check and balance. We're saying the Governor General has a role to fulfill here to say, well, there hasn't been that established check and balance. There hasn't been that established criteria. And if it's not established, if there hasn't been a loss of confidence, why is Justin Trudeau calling this election? Well, if he's only calling it for power and not putting people first, that's a wrong thing to do. And I get people might be cynical and say, well, all governments seek power. I would hope that in a pandemic that would not continue. And we talk about convention. We're in a pandemic. This is a pretty unique moment, probably the worst crisis that we've experienced in our lifetime, certainly my lifetime. And in this time, shouldn't the priority be to make sure people get the help they need? Shouldn't the priority be what's in the best interest of Canadians? I certainly know from speaking to people that an election is not in the best interest of Canadians.
Multiple constitutional experts have spoken out in a number of interviews saying it is very, very unlikely that Governor General Mary Simon would go against convention and reject the Prime Minister's request to dissolve Parliament. But if she did, who steps in and forms government then? Is it Erin O'Toole steps up? What does she do? If you get what you would like, what happens next?
We continue to work for people. We go back to Ottawa in September and continue to fight. There has been no loss in confidence of the House.
But
we continue.
But wouldn't there have to be a government? When we point back to 1926 and we get to the King Byng affair, someone has to be there and waiting. What happens next?
Well, we look at what happened in BC. And in BC, when Christy Clark asked the lieutenant governor in that case to dissolve Parliament, she said, no, the criteria was not met. And the government continued. What we need to do is continue work. I don't want to set up any sort of other additional political wrangling. I want to continue to go back to work in Ottawa to fight for people. We've been fighting for people. We're fighting over the summer to hear what people's concerns are. And I think we should go back to Ottawa in September. If the Liberals are serious about the increase in minimum wage, let's get it done. If they're serious about banning conversion therapy, we can make that happen. If they're serious about making sure everyone gets childcare, let's go do that. I'm ready, and I've always said I'm ready to work to help Canadians. Let's just continue working instead of spending time on an election, which is unneeded. I might also add, I'm going to do well in this election. I know, and it's good for me. It's going to be good for the party, but I don't care about that. I want to see what's in the best interest of Canadians. So we'll do well in this election if they call it. I'm not worried about that.
But if you're going to,
I am worried about what's in the interest of Canadians.
Okay, on that point, if you're confident and you and your party will want to be confident heading into this election, if you're so confident that you're going to do so well, why not have the election now? Why not get in there so that you can shape this country the way you want to shape it? Then why not go?
We're in the midst of a pandemic, and if we're in an election for 30, 40 days, we will not be able to pass any legislation. We will not be able to bring any help for people. For 40 days, at the brink of a potential fourth wave, we won't be able to put in measures to help Canadians. We won't be able to do our part to stop this pandemic. That would be a pretty callous and irresponsible thing to do at this point, for me to think about, okay, I'm going to gain seats, let's have an election. No, I want to fight for Canadians. I want to help out people. We're going to do well if the election is called. But it's not my priority. My priority is to fight for Canadians. We're in a pandemic that calls for looking at things differently, that calls for a better set of priorities, which is people fighting this pandemic, helping small business, helping workers. That's my priority.
Mr. Singh, I hugely appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today, and thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.